You think you know what sleep is. You have done it tens of thousands of times. You have woken from it. You have complained about not getting enough of it. You have built rituals around it, darkened your rooms for it, set alarms to escape it. And yet, I want to suggest to you, gently but with the full weight of neuroscience and physics, and 4 billion years of biological history behind me, that you have never once understood what actually happens when you close your eyes, that the thing you call sleep is not rest, not merely the absence of waking, not simply the brain powering down like a machine left idle. It is, in the most precise and unsettling scientific sense, a nightly rehearsal for death. And the fact that you find this frightening rather than magnificent says everything about how poorly we have taught ourselves to look at the cosmos we inhabit. Verdict 1. Your brain during the deepest stages of sleep becomes, by every measurable neurological standard, functionally indistinguishable from a brain in the final hours of biological shutdown. The prefrontal cortex, that seat of your identity, your plans, your name, your memory of who you were yesterday, goes almost entirely offline. Blood flow drops. The default mode network that constructs your continuous narrative self fragments into incoherence, and the electroencephalogram of a person in stage 3 slow-wave sleep looks so similar to certain states of dying that neurologists in the early 20th century genuinely debated whether the two phenomena shared the same underlying mechanism, and the answer we now know is yes. The glymphatic system, that extraordinary waste clearance network that only activates fully during sleep, is the same system that fails catastrophically in neurodegenerative death, which means every night your brain is doing something remarkable. It is practicing the art of letting go, flushing itself of the metabolic debris of consciousness, resetting the electrochemical gradients that make thought possible, performing in microcosm the same act of dissolution and renewal that stars have been performing since the universe was 300 million years old. Verdict 2. The self that wakes up is not, and I want you to sit with this for a moment, is not the same self that fell asleep. And this is not poetry. This is not philosophical wordplay. This is a straightforward description of what the neuroscience tells us, because during sleep, your synaptic connections are literally pruned and reweighted. The synaptic homeostasis hypothesis developed by Giulio Tononi and Chiara Cirelli tells us that waking life causes a net increase in synaptic strength throughout the brain, and that sleep exists precisely to downscale those connections, to forget selectively, to discard the noise and preserve the signal, which means the you that emerges from 8 hours of unconsciousness has a subtly but genuinely different neural architecture than the you that surrendered to it. The memories have been consolidated and transformed. The emotional charge of yesterday's anxieties has been chemically modulated by REM sleep's norepinephrine shutdown. And the continuity you feel, that seamless thread of selfhood that makes you say, I woke up, is not the persistence of an unchanged thing, but the reconstruction of a narrative, an act of cosmic storytelling the brain performs every morning, assembling from fragments the fiction of an unbroken you, the same fiction, I suspect, that the universe performs on a grander scale when it builds a galaxy from a cloud of hydrogen and calls it a continuous object across 10 billion years of transformation. Verdict 3. Death and sleep are not metaphors for each other. They are expressions of the same ancient biological instruction, written into your genome by 4 billion years of evolution on a small rocky world orbiting an unremarkable star. And to understand this, you must travel back to the earliest single-celled organisms on this planet, back to a time when the Earth was young and the sun was 10% dimmer, and the oceans were full of organisms so simple they had no nucleus, no mitochondria, no capacity for dreaming. And yet even they had circadian rhythms, even they had periods of reduced metabolic activity that we would recognize if we squinted as a primitive form of sleep, which tells us something profound, that the impulse to periodically surrender consciousness, to withdraw from engagement with the external world, to let the machinery of life run at low power, is not a quirk of complex brains, but a fundamental property of life itself, as ancient and as universal as photosynthesis, as deep in the tree of life as the genetic code, and death in the biological sense is simply what happens when that withdrawal becomes permanent, when the reset never completes, when the glymphatic flush never finishes, when the synaptic restoration never arrives, which means that every night you have successfully completed a process that one day will remain incomplete. And the difference between sleep and death is not categorical, but a matter of whether the morning comes. Verdict 4. The universe itself sleeps and has been sleeping and waking in cycles so vast that 13.8 billion years is merely the duration of a single breath. Consider that the stars you see above you tonight are not permanent fixtures of an eternal backdrop, but temporary concentrations of hydrogen plasma engaged in a slow surrender to entropy, each one burning through its fuel at a rate that guarantees its eventual collapse. And when a star, the mass of our sun, exhausts its hydrogen and swells into a red giant and sheds its outer layers into a planetary nebula, leaving behind a white dwarf cooling slowly in the dark, it is not dying in any final sense. It is sleeping, storing in its crystallizing carbon core the heavy elements forged across billions of years of nuclear fusion, waiting in a universe that will grow cold and dark over timescales of 10 to the power of 14 years before the last stellar remnants cool to background temperature, and in the cosmological models of an oscillating universe or a multiverse, in which our Big Bang is simply a local fluctuation in a quantum foam of space-time. This entire 13.8 billion year story is itself a single night's sleep in a cycle of cosmic becoming that makes the word forever feel inadequate and the word death feel provincial. Your nightly surrender of consciousness is, in this light, not a small and frightening thing, but a participation in the oldest rhythm in the cosmos, the pulse of matter organizing and dissolving, of complexity arising and subsiding, of the universe exploring itself through temporary structures that flicker into awareness and then release back into the dark from which they came. Verdict 5, and this is the one I want you to carry with you. The fact that you wake up is the most statistically improbable event in the known universe. Because consider what has to be true for a morning to exist. Consider that the iron in your blood, without which your neurons could not fire and no dream could form and no waking could occur, was forged in the core of a star that died in a supernova explosion before our solar system existed, scattered across light years of space, gathered by gravity into the molecular cloud that collapsed to form our sun, incorporated into the rocky planetesimal that became the Earth, cycled through 4 billion years of geological and biological history, passed from organism to organism across the entire tree of life, before arriving, impossibly, in the hemoglobin of your red blood cells. And consider that on this pale blue dot, this mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam, as seen from 4 billion miles away in the photograph taken by Voyager 1 in 1990, on this vanishingly small and cosmically unremarkable piece of rock, the atoms that were once the hearts of dead stars have arranged themselves into a structure capable not only of sleeping and waking, but of wondering why it does so, of building neuroscience and physics and philosophy to understand the mechanism of its own nightly dissolution, of sitting in the dark and feeling afraid of a process that is, in the deepest sense, the very signature of being alive. And when you understand this, when you truly feel the weight of it, the fear does not disappear, but it transforms into something richer, something closer to what the Greeks meant by the word awe. Because you are not a creature who will one day sleep permanently and be lost. You are the universe's way of knowing what sleep feels like, of experiencing the terror and the softness of the border between being and not being. And the carbon and oxygen and calcium in your body will not be lost when your final sleep arrives, but will be returned to the cosmos, to become, over timescales that humble the imagination, other stars, other worlds, other forms of awareness we cannot yet conceive. So tonight, when you close your eyes and feel the self begin to dissolve, when the prefrontal cortex releases its grip on the story of you and the brain, surrenders to its ancient maintenance rituals, try, if you can, to feel not the smallness of the moment, but its immensity. Try to feel that you are participating in a rhythm as old as the first stars, that your surrender is a kind of trust placed in the cosmos, that every morning you return from the dark is a small miracle compounded by billions of years of improbable history, and that the final sleep, when it comes, will not be an ending but a transformation, a return, a giving back of borrowed stardust to a universe that has all the time in existence to find new and extraordinary uses for it. Keep looking up.